Well, first, everybody, thank you for taking the time to sit with us today and learn a lot about a lot of different things. Today, I'm talking about harnessing AI as a clinician. A little bit about me. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I've stayed here for pretty much most of my life. And I've worked in retail and management. I've worked in inpatient. I went back to retail. I've done clinical consulting, and recently moved into academia at St. John Fisher University at the Wegman School of Pharmacy. So I'm an assistant professor there. And I do have to say, just to echo everything that Mike was talking about, this has been quite a journey for me. The last 2.5, 3 years has been continuous education over and over again outside of our regular, CMEs that we have to do. And one of these things was AI. And now that I'm in academia, I get to do some research, which is great. And I found some other folks on faculty who are very interested in AI. One of my faculty colleagues just published a paper, and it was all about the utilization of AI in pharmacy. And so there's a lot of buzz behind it. However, there there isn't a lot of good journalistic studies on AI at this point that doesn't go deep, right? You can find a lot of stuff that goes really deep into data science or computer sciences, but it's very difficult to find that in healthcare. So stay tuned because there's going to be a lot more research coming out. So that's a little bit about me and why I was even interested in this topic. Now, I've gone to a lot of conferences, as I'm sure many of you have. And in the past 2 years, you've probably seen a lot of offerings to talk about AI and what does this mean? And are we losing jobs? Or, if you don't get on now, will you miss the boat? So this is something constant for us that we've continued to hear over and over and over again. So I'm sure in your institutions, your communities, even personally, you might be using this a little bit. You might be using it a lot. Maybe you've tried to avoid it altogether. But I thought it was important because uh, as I was looking through, I do have to admit, I do TikTok. My wife got on it, and I felt like I had to do it because that's one of the only ways that I'd be able to communicate with her, as any of you with a spouse that uses TikTok know. So as I was using it, I would come across some of these ads, and I couldn't believe how many ads I was getting for text prediction and soap note creation and patient documentation. You probably all have seen these ads come through. Uh, so I thought, we've all seen this. We've probably all been privy to it from our consumption of media. So why not talk about this? Like, does AI actually help us? Um, what does AI really even mean? Because it just seems like a very uh, melded mesh of technology and computer science. So today, what I really want to do, you've seen it listed on your screen here, is I want to talk about artificial intelligence and its basic functions, what the big verbiage that you might hear, what those even mean. We'll get to that very soon too. And differentiate between machine learning, natural language, computer vision, robotics, uh, understanding generative AI, which is what probably most of you are familiar with when you think about Bard, ChatGPT, Gemini, Apple Intelligence. That's our generative AI. And then we're going to go into specific healthcare applications and how you and I could evaluate these things for um, how well they're going to work within our organization, how usable it is, how expensive it is. And there's a bunch of different measurements that we would want to look at because you've probably, if you've ever researched a different application to use for AI, there are hundreds for one single task. So we have a lot of information we have to dig through, and it could be a pretty effective way to do that. And lastly, is just implementing these new AI practices, whatever that might mean for you. You might be somebody who doesn't really care too much about this topic and just want to learn a little bit about it, all the way to somebody who is advanced and has it able to maybe code themselves a bit and create some of their own chatbots. Hopefully, there's something here for everybody. So, getting right into it, what is artificial intelligence? So NASA gets uh, their definition out of an executive order that was found in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019. So they call it a computer system that can perform complex tasks normally done by human reasoning, decision making, creating. And secondly, the Oxford English Dictionary, because I have to tell you, when I did my research, there are hundreds of definitions for AI. There's not one single one that everybody's agreed to. So I had to find the most common ones. And I think that Oxford English Dictionary did a good job explaining that it requires human intelligence. So they list these things out, visual perception, speech recognition, decision making, and translation between languages. So when we look at artificial intelligence, we have to think about, okay, so we know what artificial means. It just means false or man-made or not organic, maybe. But what is intelligence? And so going in a little bit further here, if something is to be intelligent, it's usually going to maintain these 5 areas. So learning. So it has to have the ability to improve performance based on maybe past experiences. Then you have reasoning here. We have to apply logical rules and draw conclusions to make these decisions. Problem solving. We have to identify if there might be a problem and a solution potentially. Again, these are complex or novel situations. Perception. So they have to have perception. You have to interpret different inputs that are coming their way, whether visually or auditorily. And then lastly, language understanding. So we're comprehending and even generating human language. So all these really have to come together to say that something is actually intelligent. So when we talk about a computer, what areas do they function in that meet these uh, qualifiers for intelligence? So this next screen right here, I'm going to get my laser pointer out. So you see in the center here, we have AI. And these are going to be the 5 major branches of AI. So we have machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, robotics, and expert systems. So you've probably heard these definitions or maybe at least seen these words somewhere in reading, or even if you've been exploring different applications, they'll probably state what type of application this is. So when we talk about machine learning is really just dumping a bunch of information into a computer analysis, and they will learn from it. So I know that seems very surface level, but then if we go down the hierarchy here, I can explain a little bit better. So we have different types of machine learning. We have supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So if we were to think about this in an analogy, say we wanted to teach a computer system the difference between cats and dogs, right? So that eventually they might be able to identify a cat on its own without any sort of information we're giving them and label that as a cat. So supervised learning, what we would do is we would label pictures. So we would show them a picture of a dog, a picture of a cat. And underneath those, we would label it dog and cat. So in supervised learning, we give them tons of different pictures of dogs and tons of different pictures of cats. And we're labeling it. So the machine has been able to find, okay, there's patterns here, there's pattern recognition. And eventually at the end of its learning, hopefully it can identify the difference between cats and dogs. Now, unsupervised learning would say, I'm just going to throw tons of pictures of cats, dogs, lions, baboons, whatever we want to in it. We're never going to label it, but we're going to let this machine parse out the differences. They're going to find patterns that maybe you and I hadn't found before. Maybe it's a hair type in one of the animals that they see consistently over and over again. We might not have thought of that. So it comes to the same end, but different ways. So we think about it medically. Supervised learning would be medical imaging if we're trying to do breast cancer analysis or breast tumor analysis. We would label, different breast tissue imaging and say, this one has a tumor and this is the type of tumor it is labeled. And then we have another picture that has no tumor, no uh, tissues that seem irregular. And we'd say, normalized tissue. And we keep feeding those over and over again. So it learns to know, okay, so I've seen so many different types of tumors in breast tissue. I can identify that pretty easy. We're unsupervised learning. Maybe we want to understand something about tumors that we didn't know. So we just give them a ton of pictures of uh, breast tissue tumors, and it might find a different pattern that would help us with early detection or diagnosis or treatment in the future. Now, I get that it goes a little bit deeper into what different machine learning types are, but I thought that was really relevant and interesting because we've probably all seen that we can do a lot more detection, early detection of types of cancers, especially because of machine learning. So I thought that would be interesting for you to understand. Now, deep learning and neural networks are a little bit different because deep learning is really just taking a ton of data and having this computer analyze it. Okay, so neural networks, I like to think of this kind of like our reinforcement perception. So when we think about a memory, you think about, I want you at home to do this now. Think about one of your best memories. Maybe it's a summer at a cabin with the family. Or maybe it's your wedding. Maybe it's a birth of a child. Maybe it's a birthday, whatever it is. You think about that day and you could smell the confectionaries from the oven, right? You can taste it in your mouth. Maybe you hear just the rumbling of people talking. Maybe you see or envision seeing aunts, uncles, and whoever. Neural networks work like this in a way where we are giving it different types of input to the same end. So they're layering on top of each other, saying, okay, this is one type of input. Maybe we'll call that smell. This is another type of input. Maybe we'll call that touch, and we're driving all that same information to reinforce a learning opportunity, and we call that deep learning. So underneath that, though, we look at natural language processing. And this is what everybody here would probably understand as like speech recognition, understanding human cadence in their talking, maybe sentiment. Now we're working on potentially tone. It might be able to understand tone. When we go down to large language models, this is where you actually get your chat GPT, your chatbots, or Copilot, Gemini. They use deep learning models to get all these types of different language models. And with Google, I would say Google Chat GPT, this is what I use specifically. It's only getting better and better recognizing my own, the way I speak, and it retains that information for me. So over on the other side here, there's just going to be some interesting things. Robotics, you probably all know the Da Vinci machine for the microscopic or surgery. So small incisions, computer assisted. So when we think about AI, I don't want everybody to always think of like AI is taking over. Like we hand the machine to AI and say, please complete this task. It's really augmented. So one of the best ways to think about how this is an augmented thing is think about a Tesla versus an electric bike. A Tesla, a lot of people think about just getting into the Tesla, punching your directions, sitting back, and just letting the car drive. When really AI should be acting more like an electric bike. It helps you up hills. Maybe it just makes the experience a little bit easier, maybe even more enjoyable because you get to see the scenery around you. But it is a pairing of machine and human to ensure that you're getting where you want to go. Um, I heard that in a conference I went to not too long ago, and I thought that's a great analogy of how we should utilize AI. Computer vision, I don't want to say it's new because you're going to hear in a second why it's not new, but we're going to see these more and more. So a computer vision is a camera attached to a screen of a computer, and it can identify information from that screen, take visual and auditory input, and then use AI to complete a task. Something silly that I like to use as an example. I bought one of those LG light bar devices that go behind your TV, and I thought it would just be the lights and would do it all by itself. But when the package came, it came with this little camera to stick over on top of the TV. So some of you at home might have the same thing and know exactly what I'm talking about. but it would take light from the TV and it would perceive which corners or which areas of the screen were producing different types of light, different colors, bandwidths. And then it would feed it to the back of the TV and tell the LEDs here, this part of the screen is producing blue. So it would put blue behind it. That's a good analogy for how computer vision works. And as you start thinking about how AI might work, you can probably see how computer vision really could do some advanced tasks for us. Lastly, expert systems, which is kind of what we're talking about today, is a conglomeration of a lot of these, maybe one or two, maybe all of them, into a very specific AI model meant for a very specific task. Okay. So, as a true academic and teacher, I feel like I need to go through some of the history. As you're looking at the screen here, you might know who this is. If I said the name Alan Turing, you might not know who that is, but Benedict Cumberbatch played Alan Turing in the movie Imitation Game. And so on the left, you're going to see that that's the true Alan Turing. Little history about him. He was born in England in 1912. He gained a lot of recognition at the age of 22. He had a dissertation on the central limit theory at King's College. So that's what really bolstered him into the academic world. And then he developed during World War II, the bomb machine, which is the German Enigma code machine, war breaking machine. So that's where he got this popularity from. That's where if you've seen the movie, you've seen all of the challenges, issues he had to work through to get this Enigma machine up and running. And it was very successful. Obviously, we broke the code and made many advancements at that time. But around that time, he had written, right after the war, he had written an article called "The Thinking Machines" or "Can Machines Think?" and talking about them thinking machines. Specifically, that's where we get the word imitation game from. It was found in the journal Mind, and that's what the name of the journal was, Mind, from 1950. And what he was quoted to say was, "A computer would deserve to be called intelligent if it could deceive a human being into believing that it was human." Okay, so this was one of the first thoughts about how machines might act like humans. First time it was put into writing. And so following that, some really interesting things came along. However, Alan Turing, unfortunately, had taken his life in 1954. He was convicted in 1952 of homosexuality and was chemically castrated. So he had a lot of challenges after that. But had we had accepted him, we may be way further along than we are currently. So I just want us to reflect on this guy was amazing. He had some wonderful advancements that really helped the human race. And lastly, one of his other quotes was, "If a machine can think, it might think more intelligently than we do. And then where should we be?" So he had a concern about the ethics of AI as well. But following Alan Turing, we have Dartmouth College. So there was a conference in 1956 where you see this fun group of guys here chilling outside of Dartmouth University. We had John McCarthy. He had a presentation called "The Cerebral Mechanisms of Behavior," which was where we first saw the introduction of natural language processing. And the logic theorist was something that was it was a computer generated first strike possibilities for Russian nuclear devices, where they had a computer system that was able to use an AI type framework to predict where nuclear strikes would happen across the United States. So you're probably thinking at this time, if we were talking about AI or computer technology and how to defend ourselves against Russia or potentially beat Russia, at this time was like the Cold War. So America, the federal government saw, okay, wait, there's an opportunity here. We can we can really defeat our enemies and become top dog in the technology world if we invest in this. So there was a ton of investment going on from federal grants during this time, and we called this the golden age of AI. So that went until the late 60s, roughly. So federal programs incentivized us in the wake of the Cold War. Places like Stanford and MIT, Lincoln Laboratories, and Carnegie Mellon, uh, they hosted folks like Frank Rosenblatt at Cornell University, who first talked about machine learning. So that brings me all to the ELIZA effect, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But ELIZA, if you know anything about AI, there's something called the ELIZA effect. But that was actually a machine first. So in 1966, there was a chatbot that came out called ELIZA, where they did a study. They put a bunch of patients in front of this ELIZA machine who would act as a therapist for them. And this is actually still available online. I did check it out. Really interesting, but it would help with self-reflection. Some of these participants really thought a therapist was on the other side. So it started interacting with it as though it was a human, asking questions as though it was a human. And that's where we get this term ELIZA effect from is, wow, we've convinced this human that this machine is a human. That's exactly what Alan Turing was talking about. And there's something called the Turing effect or the Turing test, where we will measure how human-like a machine is. And inversely, you've probably heard of this. I'm not even gonna say you've all come in contact with this before. But do you know what they call those picture frames before trying to get into a website? They might put a bunch of pictures up with like a fire hydrant, and you have to like outline the fire hydrant, or you have to identify which pictures have bikes or which pictures have cars. I'm gonna give you a second. Do you remember what that's called? It's CAPTCHA, right? So that is what we actually call an anti-Turing test, or sorry, anti-Turing test, where we are trying to see whether the information trying to be accessed is coming from a human or a machine. So a CAPTCHA is actually, we want to know you're a human, right? Because robots can't really figure this out yet. So it's an anti-Turing test. Okay, so moving forward, the winters of AI, I'm not going to stay here long. Really, all it was is from the 70s to like the late 90s, huge recessions, raise in oil prices, a ton of the federal grants dried up, and it got to a point where nobody was studying AI anymore because there was a ton of scrutiny in the academic side. So this led to private research, which is where we got the terms machine learning, pattern recognition, and informatics. So if you look at any studies from around that time period, the 70s to late 90s, if you see those words there, machine learning, pattern recognition, and informatics, a lot of that was private research trying to hide the idea that they were trying to research AI. So it wasn't until the reemergence of AI interest in 2010 that we started this boom again. And that was due to the data we were getting, academic interest. So now the academics are getting involved again. Funding, there's some funding now, but more importantly, there's computing power. The problem that we had always found was AI takes a ton of effort electronically, thermally. You've probably heard of the amount of water it takes to cool AI systems out in like the Silicon Valley. So as computing power goes up, the ability to reach the human intelligence level that would be acceptable from you and I when we think about like I can't remember the name of the show, but the Danger Master Robinson, uh, the idea that we can have robotic interaction just like we would with a human. So as computing power goes up, that's where we're going to get our advancements from. Okay. So now that we've exited the history side, let's dig in a little bit deeper. So the ELIZA effect. This all deals with human trust, and there are positives to this and challenges. As all of you understand, if you've used different documentation technology in your offices with your patients, there are folks who absolutely will not let you do that. They'll say, nope, it's going to the cloud, and then it's going to, the government has my information and knows all about my disorders and such. Well, we do want these people to trust our patients, to trust the applications we're using, and we want to trust the applications we're using. So we like the ELISA effect in that way, especially if we're going to things like therapy. If we could find a way to have a virtual therapist for maybe like a virtual diary or self-reflection, we would want them to trust those machines to do such. The challenges come is when we trust them too much. And I wish I would have saved some of these examples that I came into, but my problem with trusting in AI is when it comes to very specific information or what we call high stakes issues. If you trust the AI output on a high stakes issue, you could really injure yourself. Let's give a case example here. Continuous glucose monitors. I'm sure some of you here have been able to work with a patient who has what we call a semi-closed loop system, or partially, or maybe a full closed loop system, where they have something like a Dexcom G6 or G7 on their arm, and they may have a pump. It might be a Medtronic's pump, um, the T-Slim. It could be an Omnipod, whatever it is. There are closed loop systems where it's almost acts like a artificial pancreas, where it will automatically read your blood glucose, see where you're trending, and give you the appropriate insulin to keep fighting that. And usually where they would have you inject a certain amount right before you eat, this can predict it based on your normal eating patterns, or you can program it in a way to respond to your normal eating pattern. So really, you could potentially trust the system fully and just hands off. But if you did that, again, think back to some of your patients who have these systems. There are times where the Dexcom is absolutely wrong, right? So, what do we usually tell folks who are using a continuous glucose monitor? If you're getting numbers that don't make sense, or maybe in the early morning, or maybe if we're having a difficult to control patient, or their blood glucose is difficult to control, we might tell them just to use it once a day along with it to calibrate it, just in case. And there are many times where the system will read out and say, you're high, you know, give yourself insulin. And if we listen to that, we could bottom out, because I've had my wife many times who has to use these machines, many times have to check her blood sugar again with her regular blood glucose monitor to double check this. Now, this is a perfect example of human trust in the in our fields. We have to trust it to a degree, but you also have to challenge it to say, like, does this make sense? Reverse engineer their answers. Can you find the sources for what they're saying? So the ELISA effect is real. You really have to consider this every time you're using AI, especially these chatbots like generative AI. So you probably are very familiar with these images on your screen. Apple Intelligence really being one of the newer images over here. We have ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, and Google Gemini. I have to say that I am the proud user of ChatGPT. I was an early adopter, though. I pay for my program. I don't do the pro one. I can't remember what they call it now, but it's $20 a month. But then I also use Microsoft Copilot sometimes. The reason why I use Copilot is because my institution at St. John Fisher University uses Microsoft products, and we have a closed system. So whereas the system I use at home, ChatGPT, is an open. So what this means is that we take all that information from, we'll call it the cloud. ChatGPT gives us all the information we want. We ask it a bunch of questions. The questions go out. We get answers, right? The interesting thing with the closed system that I have with Copilot is that the information will be pulled in. I'll ask, I will clarify, boil it down, but all of the information that I'm inputting doesn't go back to the cloud. It stays internally. So this would be beneficial, or would make sense for those using this for data, patient data or research data. You really should not be using open systems to be working on large data sets that could contain information you don't want the data for the world to see, because it's going to teach the system every time it goes out. So prompt engineering, you'll see that on your screen over here. Prompt engineering, what is that? So you can go on to any of these chatbots and treat it like Google. What are the best recipes for, mango salsa? Sorry, I couldn't think of anything else, and I really want mango salsa. And it can give you some replies, and they might be okay. But prompt engineering is a specific way to structure your requests to generative AI bots, like the ones you see on your screen, that gives you the best response that you can get with AI currently. You will get some responses if you just use total natural language, talk like you would any individual, but you're going to get the best response use prompt engineering. Our next slide will go into that a little bit. But you got to think about these high stake errors that we talked about. Back a second ago, we talked about the continuous glucose monitor and how if we trust the system completely, we could probably bottom out with our blood glucose. But I like to think about this as like a personal versus professional, these high and low stakes. So a low stake to me would be, create a recipe for mac and cheese. High stake would be evaluate patient profiles for misdiagnoses. Now, I'm sure all of you, if you were to input a patient profile onto one of these chatbots and ask them to evaluate for misdiagnosis, you're not going to copy and paste that and plug it into a response to, whoever you're supposed to be sending it to. You're going to double check that. You're probably going to go back in the chart and say, wait, does that make sense? Like, do I actually have enough information here? Because you're an experienced clinician. You know to go back and do that. You know that you have to find supporting evidence. We've all probably even been yelled at on rounds at some point for not having the correct answer or an appropriate supporting information. So we're going to naturally do that. Now, at least I hope you would. But if we really did trust the system completely at this point, I give students sometimes copying and pasting those answers from AI, and they don't understand that it's an obvious incorrect answer. So we have to use our clinical knowledge along with AI to make these valuable answers. Okay. Last thing I want to tell you about prompting before I go to the next slide is, even though you could treat it as Google, don't treat generative AI as Google. I'm going to teach you how to prompt correctly, because the old adage for AI is garbage in, garbage out. So if you're going to give it a garbage prompt, you're probably going to get a garbage response. And then we have to be aware of something called hallucinations and confabulations. I will go into that just a little bit further, into the presentation. But you might know that a hallucination is where an AI system includes a word, an idea that was not originally trained on. And a lot of that has to do with what we call text prediction. Instead of the machine taking, we'll say, auditory, like maybe it's recording a conversation between two people. Maybe instead of actually taking the auditory input, translating exactly what the person said, they would instead do text prediction. So they would get some auditory input. They would go ahead and translate that. But instead of doing that same action, it would actually try to predict the next word that would come up. And we're going to see in a minute that would actually cause a lot of racial bias issues in our early concepts of the ChatGPT models. Okay, so in prompting, this is something I want you to take home with you. I want you to all try this. And even as you're listening to me right now, like maybe you're dozing off a bit. Maybe AI isn't really your cup of tea. That's okay. What I would like you to do, if you can take anything out of this today, is take this slide home with you. So this is how I would set up a prompt for AI. First, you want to assign a role. So I'm going to tell AI, okay, let me think about how many times I've done this. You know what? I did this for a CME once just to see if it would work. So that's going to be my case example. If I'm trying to create a CE course, so I'm going to say, you are an expert in continuing medical education, specifically in the area of pharmacology. Number two, I would say, so I want to provide context for the AI bot. So I'm going to say, I am a pharmacy researcher at maybe I'll say a school of pharmacy, because that context might make sense or might matter. And my goal is to create a continuing education program on such and such, right? And then you need to give it an instruction. You're going to assist me by, maybe I'll say, evaluate my current CE module information for accuracy, for, obtaining the objectives or maintaining the objectives, correct questions, whatever you want to do. You're going to assist by doing these things. And then lastly, you're going to give it some focused information. So maybe I'll say, the only resources I want you to use are the American Dermatology Association and the DePiro textbook. I can really bring it down to something very niche, and I might even upload a couple files of PDFs that contain the information that I want. So this type of prompting to an AI bot will give you the best response. Now, you don't have to take my word for it, but you can go ahead and research prompt engineering. There are a lot of great guides out there about prompt engineering. This is just one way to do it. I found that this has been the most effective way of getting a good response, especially in a world where, medicine, we have to be very precise. Um, and so I've tried a lot of different prompt engineering uh, attempts. I found this one to be the best. So please take this home. Try it with anything. Just pick something random so you at least can say you've done this, and to see how you got a better response. So maybe you go in first and say, create a CME event on heart failure and see what it does for you. And then do it differently by using this. Say, you are an expert heart failure. You're an expert in heart failure. I'm going to so and so. You try that response and see how different it is. So test it out yourself. Okay, let's dig just a little bit deeper here. So when we move into AI in healthcare, there's so many different areas to where AI is actively has applications and software in AI. On your screen, you're going to see here medical diagnosis. So we've talked a bit about that already with tumor prediction or disease prediction or identification. Drug discovery. We had one of our first drugs ever come through drug discovery through an AI platform that went to market recently. I don't remember the name of it. I believe it was an oncology medication. We have patient experiences. Believe it or not, AI is found so much in your day to day that you probably don't even realize. For an example, if you're at a stoplight and you see those little motion detectors on the top of the stoplight, that is technically AI. It's taking information. It's showing that there are some cars in line there, and it will change the light based off of how deep that line of cars is. That takes some sort of intelligence, and it actually executes a task for us. So that's how simple it is. So when I say patient experience being an AI, an AI product, you just got to think about your online web platforms or even chat bots to talk to your patients. Data management, that's what we're going to go into in a minute here. Robotic surgery, talked about the Da Vinci machine. And you're going to see going on here, there's so many different things you can do here, but we're going to step into data management for a second. Okay. So healthcare data management. There's a few different areas in which this covers. So that's clinical documentation improvement. There is medical transcription documentation, EHR integration, and operational efficiency. So, what we're really going to focus on today is medical transcription and documentation. So, this is what you think about with your auditory notes that are integrated with the EHR to just document for you. Uh, this in documentation improvement would be more of like data mining and evaluating what's already been put into the EHR to see if we can improve it that way, where this is more hands-on with you as the user. These are they're just a subset, like a very small glimpse of what AI transcription tools are available right now. Okay. There are free. There are ones that are free, but it usually is only like a trial, and then you end up having to pay for it. And then there's ones that are only paid. So the point of me putting this slide up here is to show you, you know, if I'm put in front of all these different options, how do I choose? Um, and I came into this presentation really thinking about this. How do we choose a good AI platform or software? Do you just pick one and just start from there and experience it and see what you liked and what you didn't like and then move from there? Or do you go to one that is already paid that you know tons of people use, you know it's going to be a good device? Really depends. Really can't say. But what I can tell you is how to go ahead and evaluate these things. So we're going to go into one of these. It's going to be Nuance Dragon Medical 1. But first, I want to show you a headline that I saw. Okay, so this comes from the Associated Press. Its researchers say an AI-powered transcription tool used in hospitals invents things no one ever said. Now, when I said that there are hallucinations earlier on or confabulations, OpenAI was the one that powered this application called Whisper, and it was admitting hallucinations. Now, there are racial biases in these systems. So, for example, something that it said, now don't quote me exactly, but it was something like this. It said something about, maybe the documentation was 2 women came into the ER for such and such. Instead, the EHR documentation would say 2 Black women came into the ER for such and such. And where that was never said, didn't occur in the audio transcription, it was due to this text prediction. So if you remember what I said before about this, you can translate audio directly, word for word, or you can use predicted text to accomplish the task. That's what this was doing. It was using text prediction instead of actual audio transcription. It shows that there is issues within this AI tool. It's what we call the weakly supervised machine learning. So if you remember from supervised learning, that's labeled data that you teach a machine with, but this was weakly supervised. So there was a lot of racial bias that was found in the materials going into teaching the machine itself, but we're teaching it off of data that you and I did as clinicians, or what, Ma and Pa Doc did as clinicians, 20 years ago. So there's going to be a ton of biases in this learning data sets that we have to filter through. But AI said, as long as you're not using it for high stakes issues, it should not be used for that. It should be used for low stakes issues, right? They admitted to that. But the thing is, over 30,000 medical personnel are still using this for EHR documentation on the West Coast. Okay, so there are issues, and that's why we really need to be clear about what products we're using. This is how you would evaluate it. We're going to look at the clinical accuracy. Most of these software applications will tell you how accurate they are. Obviously, my top number one is compliance and security. I'm a pharmacist. I live and die by HIPAA, as by so many of you probably do as well. But this really leads to the top for me is compliance and security. Integration with your current EHR. How usable is it? Will training take a big lift in your organization, or can they do it on themselves? Or is it usable in the sense that it's click to start? Very simple. Cost of implementation. So there is something called total product cost or total cost of purchase or ownership. That's what it is. Total cost of ownership. Some of these systems that you may want to use that are a little bit niche for you might cost a lot more, right? Because they might have to hire somebody else to manage the system itself, maybe the framework or infrastructure. Maybe they need an expert in the area that you're working in to integrate with their application as well. So it doesn't necessarily always mean right out of the box, this is what it costs. If you need something specialized, it's going to cost a lot more. And lastly, vendor reliability and support. If I was going to structure this based off of what I feel is important, I would put that number 2. The reason being is right now, these companies seem like a dime a dozen. They're not all going to make it. So how do you choose somebody that you feel pretty confident that they're going to make it? Now, I chose Nuance, Dragon Medical One, because any of you that have been in medicine for quite a while, you know that Dragon transcription services have been around forever, since the 80s. And I was born in the 1900s, so I remember this. However, it is the most utilized text transcription or audio transcription documentation software in the United States right now. I went to their website directly, to Nuance's website directly, but I also utilized techradar.com and classresearch.com. TechRadar is phenomenal at evaluating these side by side. So if you want to look further in, maybe you're looking for a transcription application, I would start at TechRadar probably. Class Research tells you how acceptable they grade these, and they win awards at the best devices or best applications, and Nuance Dragon Medical One has won it 4 years in a row with them. So on their website, and then I paired it with what TechRadar said, their accuracy is at 99%. Some of these systems, though, are 99.4, 99.5%. So they should list exactly the percentage. Compliance, there is a type of compliance like Microsoft. So first of all, hopefully I don't say this completely wrong, but Azure, my tech friend told me I kept saying it wrong, but Microsoft Azure cloud platform uses HITRUST, which HITRUST is a certified infrastructure. It's fully HIPAA compliant. But if you see the HITRUST certification, that means it's the top of the line. Integration, it is integrated with most, it has the most integrations with EHRs. Epic has a chokehold on this. Obviously, it can integrate with Epic. First month it's $99 a month, but the first month it costs $525 to start it up. If you sign up for multiple years, it goes to $85 a year if you're going to do, or sorry, $85 a month if you're going to do 2 years, and then $75 a month if you're going to do 3 years. And so the support, they're open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. So the support itself is great. The best is that it's a live agent. I would assume that they would have used AI agents to do this, but I find it important still to use live agents. And because they're so well integrated already in the medical system, it seems, for my measurements, this is an obvious great one to use, but it might be too expensive to use for your institution, depending. I did just meet with my doctor yesterday, and she asked me when she came in, is it okay if I use technology? And I said, that's funny. I am going to do a presentation on this tomorrow. And I said, which one are you using? She says, oh, I'm using Dragon. I said, oh, Nuance Dragon Medical One. I knew all about it. It's just, it's a coincidence, funny coincidence how that happened. But we started talking about it, and she said she absolutely loves it. It's been saving her sometimes 2 hours a day on documentation. And as any of us, especially as clinicians, understand, documentation is the number one reason for burnout right now. EHR systems are the number one reason for people not liking their job. I mean, that might be a little excessive, but it is one of the number one reasons. So I would use this as your checklist to grade them against each other, because you should talk to multiple companies before ever choosing one, because there's a lot of very specific integrations that you might need to discuss with these companies. and going side by side, this is the best way to ensure that you're getting the product that you want. Now, this is one of my last slides here. 23andMe. Would any of us ever would have thought years ago that 23andMe would have a downfall? I would have never thought it. They seem to be one of the bigger genetic testing companies in the world at the time. But when they were declaring bankruptcy, this was reported from NPR. They mentioned a partnership with pharmaceutical giant GSK, where 80% of the customers who signed up for 23andMe, they signed into this kind of research when they signed up. So there was an informed consent that a lot of these people signed saying, I'm okay with my information being used for drug development or healthcare development and data analysis. But what they probably didn't know is if they went under, that their information was going to be sold. And GSK was their number one group to purchase this information. So we have to think about, what type of support and vendor reliability is there, because some of this HIPAA data might be sent off to somewhere else if this company crashes. So just keep that in mind, that there are ethical issues when we go into thinking about which product we're going to choose. Don't just choose the cheapest product because it works for your budget. You might have HIPAA concerns at that point. Okay, so I've covered a lot. We've boiled the ocean. I feel like I went from the history to general knowledge about AI to very deep understandings about machine learning, the different subtypes. So I would just like you to identify an area that could benefit from gaining efficiency in your clinic. So don't go to your computer screen, say like cool AI applications, and just look through and find something cool. That I would like you to do almost like a SWOT analysis. Think about, where are the inefficiencies in my clinic that could use help? And then let's try to find a tool to do that. Let's not work backwards. And then we want to compare and contrast similar AI software. So use my checklist, use Tech Radar as well, use Class Research. And if you can get free trials, use free trials to see if it works out. You ask for demos, but don't go into purchasing or utilizing AI software lightly, because it's going to be a relationship that you will struggle with. Nothing's going to work 100% out of the box. You will need to learn. You will need to adjust. Beware of your ELIZA effect. How much do you trust in machines yourself? As clinicians, we are already going to be a little impervious to the whole, I'm just going to accept everything. But just remember, there is the ELIZA effect. Lastly, prompt engineering. If you want to use AI bots that are available for generative AI, you should use prompt engineering. Unless you're just, of course, looking for mac and cheese recipes, go ahead. You can do it any way you like. To wrap it up, I've got further reading lists. Now, there's a YouTube channel. It's phenomenal if you want to learn more about AI. It's called AI Explained. Sam Altman, I would look up anything that he has to talk about, because he is your open AI individual. Lex Friedman, he did a podcast together with him. This is probably the best one they've done. There's also great learnings. Google AI has free training. Coursera also has free training that you'll see down here. AI communities, though, if you're looking to get even deeper into it and want to even code yourself, maybe make your own chatbot, you're going to want to go to GitHub, Reddit, and Stack Overflow, because these areas will teach you directly of how to build these bots. Now, I did it myself a little bit. I only utilize ChatGPT and GitHub to accomplish my tasks I'm building. But again, this is only for people who really want to develop their own stuff. It's just an interest I had. But if you want just some general information, go to that Sam Altman podcast with Lex Friedman. That link should bring you directly to it if Mike sends it out that way. If not, if you just Google that title, you'll find it directly. And here are my references.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you so much. Amazing. So I am pulling up the chat right now, but as I'm doing that, I want to give you credit, John. It was ChatGPT launched November of 22, if I'm remembering
Hmm.
correctly. And you talked to me, you called me in mid-December of
Yeah.
22 and said, "You've got to get on this. This is going to change the world." And I believe I rolled my eyes and I said, "Okay,
Yep.
John, yeah, and my goodness, just 2 years or going on three now, but it's incredible how fast AI has just taken over. And certainly in healthcare, we're seeing it really implement in many different ways. You and I were just talking yesterday. I've been tinkering and playing around with some various AI dictation software. And you mentioned that AI dictation can save a lot of time. And I agree with that. But one of the things that I think has not been discussed enough in terms of that technology is my AI dictation software is going to increase my billings because I usually am moving fast and I may dictate something short and brief because I need to get on to the next patient. And when I'm pulling my AI generated charts, I'm able to build at what I may have billed as a 99213 for those outpatient folks. Now I'm billing as a 4 or even a 5. So it's going to have a drastic increase, far greater than what I'm paying for it out of pocket
Yeah.
on my bottom line or my top line revenue. So there's just so much potential, and I think it's only going to grow as we continue to implement it. So it's exciting to give an introductory primer
Yeah.
for people
It
here
was.
today.
It's difficult for anybody who's interested in AI. Who've already been utilizing it, you probably see how difficult it could be for me to figure out exactly what I want to talk about. Because when you say we're going to talk about AI as a healthcare entity, that's like saying I'm going to talk about IT today in healthcare. It's like so big. So I try to include a lot of stuff that everybody could take a piece of. But what you said, Mike, right on, is that this can actually be not only a cost savings, but it can produce some cash flow too. There's even the misdiagnoses. You know, we used
Yeah,
to have to pay
absolutely.
companies to do data mining for us.
Interestingly, the AI I'm using will give suggested diagnoses based on the conversation. So we've got just 1 minute. So unfortunately, I'm not going to get to a lot of these questions, but I do want to get to one or two. So Betsy asked if $99 a month is for each user. And what I would say to that is check it out and do some research. The one I'm using right now, I pay $150 a month per user. There's other ones out there that are $99 a month. So check it out because there's a lot of different options out there. And then we'll put up one more question. So outside of documentation, prior authorizations are time consuming and expensive, and time equals money. Is there any options out there for AI assistance for prior authorizations for medications? Many of us have heard about insurance companies using AI to approve and deny requests.
Yeah, they are using those, and a lot of those are those expert systems though that are built in house, and that's what UHC had used. That was a big problem. United Healthcare was denying a third of the claims and using the AI software, but that was expert. So I'm not aware of anything that's available at an enterprise level. However, I didn't necessarily do that research for prior authorizations, but they are available, but it mostly will be at expert systems.
Fantastic. And look at that, John. Our buddy Rick is in here.
Hey,
So
Rick.
I had to put that one up. Hi, Rick. Oh, man. It's so fun. This is like a family reunion here. All right. Well, John, thank you so much. There are questions that are rolling in that we're not going to get to. So I will, once again, if we get more questions on AI, we will try and put together something because I want to make sure that all attendees are getting their questions answered. But, John, thank you so much. This was great. And we'll have to continue the conversation further. Maybe in the future, we'll have some stuff
Sounds
to
good to
share
me.
with
Thank
others.
you, Mike.
All right. Bye,
Bye.
John.